In the small town of Hawthorne, nestled at the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, Valentine's Day had always been a time of joy. Children exchanged hand-drawn cards, couples held hands by the frozen lake, and the scent of freshly baked pies filled the air. But there was one Valentine's Day, many years ago, that would forever haunt the town. The legend of that day is whispered in hushed tones, told only when the wind howls and the shadows stretch long into the night. It all started with a simple gift, a bouquet of roses. Now these weren't just any roses. They were deep red, almost black in their richness, with petals as soft as velvet but tinged with an unnatural sheen. The townspeople had never seen anything like them before. No one knew where they came from or who had sent them, but when the first few buds appeared in the town square, no one thought to question them. They were delivered to the home of the widow, Mary Callahan. Mary had lived alone in her weathered farmhouse just outside of Hawthorne. Widowed, young and childless, she spent most of her days tending to the garden and reading by the fireplace. Despite the emptiness in her life, Mary was known to have a warm heart. She took care of the sick, baked bread for the lonely, and offered her shoulder to anyone in need. But after the death of her husband, something about Mary had changed. There was a coldness to her eyes now, a distance that was hard to place, as if the life she had once known had slipped through her fingers and left her with nothing but the shadows of memories. The roses appeared on her doorstep one cold February morning, just as the town prepared for its usual Valentine's Day celebrations. The deep red petals stood out against the fresh snowfall, their fragrance sweet but heavy, almost sickly. She opened the note that accompanied them. For the woman who has lost everything, these roses are a token of what could have been. Mary stared at the note for what felt like an eternity. The handwriting was elegant, almost formal, and the words sent a chill down her spine. She had no idea who would send her such a thing nor why. No one had ever given her flowers like this before. Her heart began to race as an unsettling thought crawled into her mind. What did it mean? For the first time in years, Mary felt something stir within her, a feeling that was both terrifying and exciting. It had been so long since she had been touched by anything or anyone, that even the most unexpected of gestures seemed to spark something deep inside her. But the roses, their deep red petals darkening by the minute, unnerved her. There was something wrong about them, something off-kilter. She placed the roses in a vase and set them on the table. As she did, the town clock struck noon, signaling the start of the annual Valentine's Day festival. The town square would soon be filled with townspeople, all eager to exchange flowers and sweets. But Mary Callahan would not be there. She had never been one for public celebrations, preferring the quiet of her home. Still, there was a lingering feeling that she couldn't shake, a nagging sense that she wasn't alone. As night fell and the town's lanterns flickered to life, an unexpected visitor arrived at Mary's door. It was Sarah Taylor, the local schoolteacher. She was a kind woman, one who had always taken an interest in Mary after the loss of her husband. She knocked softly, her breath visible in the crisp night air. When Mary opened the door, Sarah was standing there, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Mary," she said softly, "I've heard some strange things today. You should be careful." Mary blinked, her hand instinctively brushing over the roses that still sat on the table. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the vase of roses. I heard that some folks have seen things. Strange things, happening around the town today. People claim to have seen shadows moving in the streets, and a few even reported hearing whispers in the wind. It's like, something's wrong." Mary felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Whispers?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Sarah said, stepping closer. "And people are saying that it's all connected to those roses. They say they bring bad luck, that whoever receives them is cursed." Mary's eyes narrowed, her heart beginning to race. The idea seemed absurd, but something about the way Sarah spoke made it impossible to dismiss. She glanced back at the roses, their deep red petals now curling, the fragrance more overpowering than before. "I don't believe in such nonsense," Mary said, trying to sound calm. "But thank you for your concern." Sarah frowned, her gaze still fixed on the roses. "I hope you're right, Mary. But there's something else. People are saying that anyone who accepts these flowers will be cursed, that the roses are tied to an old legend, the legend of the shadowed lover." "The shadowed lover?" Mary asked, her voice shaking despite herself. Sarah nodded gravely. "It's an old tale. Some say it's just a story to scare children, but there are others who swear it's real. A long time ago, a woman named Eliza Thorne fell in love with a man no one could see. He would send her gifts, roses, chocolates, letters, But every time she accepted them, something dark would happen. She'd hear his voice, calling her name from the shadows, whispering things that no one else could understand. And then, on the night of Valentine's Day, the roses would turn to blood. The man would come for her, and she would disappear, never to be seen again. Mary felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. And they say, "I'll disappear if I accept them?" Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the story. And it's happened before. Every year on Valentine's Day, the roses appear again. And every year someone disappears." A chill settled over Mary's chest, a weight pressing down on her lungs. She had heard of such tales, legends whispered by the older folk in town, but never had she imagined she would be part of one. It was just a story, wasn't it? But the roses, those roses were not like any others. They were different, strange, and their presence seemed to carry something ominous, something dark. As Sarah turned to leave, Mary could feel her pulse racing. She wanted to ignore the story, to laugh it off as superstition, but a cold, uneasy feeling gnawed at her. The shadows outside seemed darker than usual, the air thicker. And then, just as Sarah was about to step out the door, a sharp, unmistakable sound echoed through the house. The faint rustling of paper. It came from the table where the roses sat. "Mary?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to destroy them. Now." But it was too late. The roses, once so still, were now moving. The petals quivered as if alive. And from within the vase, something dark and sinister began to creep out. The whispers from the wind seemed to converge in that single moment, swirling around Mary's ears, too faint to understand, but loud enough to feel their power. With a sharp gasp, Mary looked at the roses once more, her heart hammering in her chest. And as she stared, she could have sworn she saw a figure, a shadow tall and dark just beyond the curtain. A figure waiting for her.
The room seemed to close in around Mary as the whispers escalated, rising in pitch and intensity. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if something ancient and powerful had awoken within the walls of her home. She turned to Sarah, but the schoolteacher's face had gone pale, her lips trembling with a fear Mary had never seen before. "Mary," Sarah whispered urgently, "the roses, burn them, bury them, do anything, but do not let them remain here. Do you hear me? You don't know what you've done by accepting them." Mary stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the bouquet of roses. The petals had shifted, the once soft and velvety edges now jagged, like the sharp teeth of some hidden creature. The dark fragrance filled her nostrils, overpowering and sickly sweet, until it almost made her stomach churn. Before she could respond, the air seemed to hum with energy, electric and dark. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was him. The man from the shadows. He stood tall, dressed in black, with a face obscured by the darkness of his cloak. His presence filled the room, casting a shadow that stretched across the walls, distorting the shapes of the furniture, as if the very room had become a twisted reflection of reality. "Mary!" His voice was soft, yet it reverberated in the room, echoing like a distant whisper. "I've come for you." Claire's heart stopped. The roses, they had been the key to awakening him. The figure in the doorway was the shadowed lover, exactly as the legend had foretold. The man who had haunted the town for generations, the one whose love had been twisted into something monstrous, something eternal. And now, he was here. Sarah took a step back, fear written on her face, but there was something else too, a strange recognition. She opened her mouth to speak but was cut off as the man in the doorway took a single step forward. The air shifted again, colder this time. The warmth of the fire in the hearth seemed to dim, as though it were being drained into the shadows. "Leave, Sarah," the figure commanded, his voice laced with a terrible authority. "You have no place here." Sarah's legs shook, but she nodded silently, stepping backward, her eyes wide with dread. She knew what the man was, and she knew what would happen if she stayed. As she exited the room, the door slammed shut behind her, the loud crash reverberating like the closing of a tomb. Mary's breath was shallow, her mind racing. The roses on the table had stopped moving, but the atmosphere in the room remained thick with an unsettling presence. The figure's eyes, dark as the night, fixed on her with a hunger that seemed to reach into her soul. She couldn't look away. "Who are you?" Mary asked, her voice trembling, though she was desperate to hide the fear creeping into her chest. He stepped into the room, his cloak swirling around him like smoke. "I am the one who was promised to you," he said, his voice an intoxicating mix of charm and threat. "The one who has waited for you." Mary tried to step back, but her feet felt like they were planted into the floor, frozen. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The darkness around her seemed to tighten, the shadows stretching toward her like hands, reaching, pulling her in. "You didn't think it was just a coincidence, did you?" he continued, his smile cold and knowing. "The roses. The curse. It's all been waiting for you." Mary felt her heart twist in her chest. The roses were not just flowers. They were the manifestation of something far older, far darker than anything she could have imagined. She understood now. The shadowed lover wasn't just a story. He was real. And he had come for her. "Why me?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, his face still hidden in shadow, but his presence undeniable. "You are the one who dared to open the door, Mary. You accepted the gift, and now you belong to me. There is no turning back. You will join me in the realm where time does not pass, where souls like ours are bound forever." Mary shook her head, terror flooding her veins. "I don't want this. I don't want to be part of this curse." He reached out a gloved hand, his fingers brushing her cheek, and for a moment, there was an unnatural warmth to his touch, a warmth that made her stomach turn. "It is not a choice, Mary. The moment the roses entered your home, you became mine. The moment you accepted them, the bond was made." A cold laugh escaped from him, and the sound reverberated through the room, shaking the walls. It was the sound of centuries of torment, of pain, and of endless longing. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his voice now a low, predatory growl. "I have waited for so long, and now I will not be denied. You will walk with me in the shadows, and together, we will watch the world burn." Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside the door. Mary's eyes widened. It wasn't just him. The darkness outside was closing in, spilling into the room. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her. The legend was not just a story, it was real, and it was consuming everything in its path. But Mary wasn't about to give in. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break the curse. "I will not go with you," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "I will fight." The figure paused, his eyes narrowing, the shadows around him swirling. "You can't fight fate, Mary," he said, a bitter edge to his words. "You were always meant to be mine." But as he spoke, Mary's gaze fell on the vase of roses, still sitting on the table. The flowers, now wilted and blackened, held the key to her salvation. With a sudden surge of courage, she turned away from the shadowed lover and grabbed the roses. Her hands shook as she ripped the petals from the stems, each one darkening and crumbling to dust in her fingers. The figure stepped forward, his eyes flashing with fury, but Mary didn't stop. She hurled the last petal into the fireplace. As it burned, the fire flared up, an explosion of light and heat that filled the room with an unbearable brightness. The shadowed lover screamed in agony, the sound of his pain reverberating through the walls. The shadows around him began to shrivel, the darkness that had once consumed the room now retreating. He reached out for her, but the flame seemed to burn him back. "No!" he roared, but his voice was fading, dissolving into the wind. The shadows melted into nothingness, and the man, the shadowed lover, was gone. Mary collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. The room had returned to normal, the oppressive air lifting as the curse was broken. The roses were no more than ashes now, scattered across the hearth. She was free. But as the warmth from the fire spread through the room, Mary couldn't help but feel the cold twinge of something else, a lingering presence. It was gone, yes, but the shadow had left its mark on her soul. And just as she closed her eyes, the faintest whisper reached her ear, a warning, a promise. "You can never escape the shadows." Thank you for following this chilling tale. If you want more spine-tingling stories, Be sure to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what comes next.